Now we're going to talk about lead guitar and how to solo over a blues progression. If you could only play one scale your entire guitar playing career, I would recommend learning the minor pentatonic scale. This scale fits over everything, which is why it's so useful, and that's why we're going to start there. So the word pentatonic, penta, 5, tonic, tones. There's 5 different tones in the scale. We'll do this in A. It's going to sound like this. I played 5 different tones, although I did repeat some of those notes. Starting off, we'll play A. I played A on the 5th fret of the high E string, and now let's go down the scale. So on the B string, I'll play the 8th fret to the 5th fret, that's G, followed by E. On the G string, 7th fret to the 5th fret, this will be D, followed by C. And then we have the root note A found on the 7th fret of the D string. So far we've done this. Now let's continue downwards. We can play G on the 5th fret of the D string. On the A string, we'll play the 7th fret, this will be E. 5th fret, that'll be D. Then on the low E string, we can play on the 8th fret, that'll be the note C, followed by the root note A found on the 5th fret. So here's the scale once again. And if we go up and then back down, we can even stretch up to the note C on the 8th fret of the high E string. So that's the A minor pentatonic scale. If we were to play this in other keys, we could use the same box shape and simply start in different positions. If our song is in G, I could play a G minor pentatonic scale. But for now, let's go back to A. Once you're familiar with that minor pentatonic scale, we can add one note to this, and this will be the blue note. What we're going to do is, in the key of A, we're going to add the note E flat, and we'll play the blues scale now. The blues scale is the minor pentatonic with the addition of one extra note. So I'll start from A, play 5 to 8 on the low E string. On the A string, we'll play D, that's on the 5th fret. And now here's the blue note. On the 6th fret of the A string, we'll play that E flat. Now to the 7th fret of the A string. To the D string, we'll play 5 to 7. Okay, so we've just done one octave of the blues scale in the key of A. Now this blues scale is relatively new in musical history. It kind of came about as blues singers were putting inflections into their songs. You wouldn't find this blues scale being used in classical music, for example, but it became very common in blues. If we continue now on the G string, we can play 5, 7, 8. On the B string, 5 to 8. On the high E string, 5 to 8. And back down. Now before we get into some licks, we're going to extend the range of this pattern just a little bit. We're going to start off on the 3rd fret of the low E string, and we're going to end up playing on the 11th fret of the high E. It's going to sound like this. So this is the A blues scale with an extended range. All right, let's take a look at this now. On the low E string, we'll play 3 to 5. On the A string, 3, 5, 6. Shift up to the 7th fret, 5 to 7 on the D string, 5, 7, 8 on the G string, shift to the 9th fret, on the B string, 8 to 10, on the high E string, 8, 10, 11. And then we'll try and get back down. Once again. So now that we have the notes of the scale, how do we make music? Well, one way is through phrasing. Phrasing has to do with the rhythm of the notes. We want to try and actually say something with these notes now. So when we play with a certain rhythm, maybe even have a breath or a space in between the notes, it can start to sound like music. If I take a certain amount of syllables, let's say I say the words, "My name is Danny." Da, 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 da. I have 5 syllables. And then I transfer those to some of the notes from the scale. Maybe we end up with something like this. Da, 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 da. 5 syllables. And then maybe I'll take a little breath, a little space, and answer this with, "My name is Danny Gill." Da, 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 da. 6 syllables now. And if I put all of that together, check out this phrase using the notes of the scale that we just learned. And it already sounds a lot more interesting than simply running up and down the scale. Now, chances are you have a different name than me, different amount of syllables, so you might want to try that out. But let me just show you what I was doing. Starting on the D string, I played 7 to 5, A string 7, 5, 7 on the D. And then I answered that, 7, 5 on the D, 7, 5, 3 on the A, followed by 5 on the low E. So far, we've done this. Now we can take the same phrase, maybe play it up an octave, starting on the A and the high E string. Once again. So those notes that I was just playing, 5 on the high E, 8, 5 on the B, 8 on the B, back to 5 on the high E. And then 5 on the high E, 8, 5 on the B, 7, 5 on the G, followed by 7 on the D string. So I was using notes from the A minor pentatonic scale. I can also try and play the same phrase, the same amount of notes, with some other new notes. Maybe I end up with something like this. Same phrase, 5 syllables, a little space, followed by 6 syllables or 6 notes. And this time I used the blues scale. I played 5 on the G, 7 on the D, 7 on the A, 5, 7 on the D. So far. Now to the G string, 5, 7, 8, 7, followed by 5, and then 7 on the D. And here's the phrase. Now, if we talk about some techniques, how about if we throw a slide in there? So I started off with that same phrase, and now when I get to the G string, 5, and I slide up and back 7, 8, 7, followed by 5G, 7D. We can also try this with a bend. Check this out. So here I started with the same first half, then 5 on the G. From the 7th fret of the G string, I strike that, bend up roughly a half step, and then release the bend, back to 5 on the G string, and then 7 on the D. And you can test yourself. If we play on the 8th fret of the G string, that's the note we're trying to bend into from the 7th fret. So that's a half step bend. One thing that's common with blues bending is to bend just slightly. Think about a singer just putting some slight inflections onto the words. I can do this from the 5th fret of the G string. I'm going to bend up just slightly here, roughly a quarter step, before grabbing 7 on the D string. So I'm not bending up a half step, just slightly, just to give it a little something. And I also kind of rake across the bottom strings before I get to the G string. It also puts a little extra inflection there into the notes. I like that effect. So if I combine this quarter step bend with the half step bend from the previous lick, maybe the phrase sounds like this. So now it's starting to sound like something. We went from just learning the notes of the scale to talking about phrases to then adding some new techniques. Slides, bends, that roughly a quarter of a step bend. And suddenly the notes start to come to life. Sounds a lot more interesting now. So work on these techniques, try and come up with your own licks. Whenever you do, you should definitely write them down or at least record them so you can then go back and say, aha, I remember that lick that I came up with. That's pretty cool. If you don't document it somehow, then they're gone and you'll be stuck just learning my licks. And of course, you'll probably have some more fun if you learn your own, write your own down. You can say, hey, check out this lick I just learned. And show all your friends. All right, so if you're feeling comfortable with that, we're ready to move on to our next section. So make sure that you're feeling good with the scales, you got some licks, and maybe take a little break. And when you come back, our next section will be copying licks.